Paul, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to start by discussing your own personal career, because you went through sort of a revelation as someone who self-describes as a former neocon who actually started to understand that perhaps the way that the world worked isn't quite what it seemed, and some of these so-called jihadists and terror groups weren't actually really just enemy combatants, but were actually being supplied and protected by our own CIA.
Sean, I swallowed the red pill, but I didn't want to. I was on Fox News all the time. I was writing books that were very successful, one called Osama's Revenge, the next 9/11, another one called Al-Qaeda Brotherhood of Terror, on and on and on. I was a neocon in favor of the war, thinking that, oh man, we even had to go into Iraq, believing the whole thing. And what happened was, I was a reporter, an old reporter. I owned a newspaper. And as a reporter, I was not getting my news from the internet. I had to go out in the field. So the first place I went was a Islamic paramilitary camp in New York State called Islamburg. Now, if you go to Islamburg, it is probably worse than anyone can imagine, because they have underground bunkers. They're training with fully automatic weapons. When they're finished with the training, and most of these recruits, the young recruits they're being trained at Islamburg, and by the way, there's at least 35 other compounds like this throughout the country. Once they're finished with their training, they go to Pakistan. And from Pakistan, they go into Afghanistan, and they fight, of course, the US troops. So I went there at least 5 times. I was the only one that actually went in there. I mean, I went in there with a camera guy by the name of Pat Walsh, who weighs about 400 pounds, but he was very, very, very brave. The pictures that you usually see of Islamburg, we took. We saw the underground bunkers. We saw the training. We even heard the explosions that were going on there. Well, what I found out was a lot of these people from Islamburg, when they came back, believed that they were financed by the CIA. That's the first thing I found. This is the head of the camp, a guy by the name of Sheikh Jilani, who's from Lahore, Pakistan, and has set up all these camps throughout the country. Came here with blind Sheikh Rahman on a CIA transport. He came here to recruit young black Muslims for the jihad. They set up these training camps, and when they were done, originally they went to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. But that's still going on. These people are still being trained, and the funding is, this is what I discovered. This is how I came to a bit of reality, that the CIA was funding this operation. Not only this operation, and that explains it, why they could persist day after day, night after night, training these people to become jihadis and to fight over there, without taking action against them. Because the FBI, and I worked for the FBI for years, did anything about it.
But so, when you broke this story in Islamburg, and obviously you say 35 other camps, training camps for militants that are going on here, when you would approach, let's say, for the official story from FBI or CIA, what story would they give you as to why these camps were allowed to operate without being raided?
They couldn't explain it. There was absolutely no explanation. And once again, I had contacts in the FBI. I worked for the FBI. I was paid by the FBI for 10 years. Now, the second thing I found, when I started looking into a guy by the name of Fethullah Gülen. Now, you and I are very much interested in Gladio, and you know how strategic Gülen is to the entire Gladio, too. Gülen has a compound in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania, less than an hour from where we're sitting, about 40 minutes from my house. Well, I went up there as well. At his compound in Saylorsburg, it was very similar to what was going on in Islamburg. They were training, doing paramilitary training. They were armed to the teeth. They were all coming in from Turkey. The neighbors had complained, and nothing was done. Nothing was ever done. The neighbors were complaining about the helicopters flying around their properties for surveillance night and day. They complained about the explosions going on the property, the sound of gunfire and of AK-47s. Nothing was done. So then I discovered, now this was really, really, really what dropped the scales from my eyes. Gülen, when he applied for his permanent residency in the United States, he was thrown out of Turkey, as you know, for trying to overthrow the Turkish government. This is going back to 1998. He was thrown out of Turkey, and just like Giuliani, he's transported. This is the guy called the most radical, most dangerous Muslim in the world, transported from Turkey to Washington, D.C. originally on a CAA transport. I discovered that, and I figured, this is insane. Mm-hmm. This is insane. And the next thing I find out is the camp that he had at Syrian was once again backed by the CIA. And his movement, he has Islamic schools throughout the country, throughout the world, as you know. Mm-hmm. And all of the schools in Central Asia are CIA agents. Well, then I find out, I looked at his, when he applied for the green card, what happened during the court hearings. Well, Representative Martin Abramowitz, who was the former U.S. ambassador to Turkey, Graham Fuller, who was very instrumental in the CIA, come up saying, this guy, Sean, is one of the most important educational figures in the world. He's a religious figure. He can bring around about interfaith dialogue. He can bring a new age of peace. He has met with the Pope. This guy can walk on water. Fethullah Gülen, we have to keep him in the country. Fethullah Gülen never wrote one word. He has a third grade education, never wrote a textbook or anything. He is uneducated.
But he's calling for a new Islamic order, essentially,
yes,
right? And
yes.
There's also the allegation that Erdogan made when there was a coup d'etat attempt last year against Erdogan. He said it was Gülen's network that was responsible, which would obviously harken back to U.S. support because Gülen's based here. But do you believe that, or do you think that Erdogan was actually just using that as an excuse to consolidate his own, basically, dictatorial powers within Turkey?
I think, Sean, what's going on there around the Caspian Sea is, well, first of all, if anybody thinks that the United States has any allegiance or any loyalty to Gülen is crazy. Gülen is expendable. They needed Gülen to establish radical madrasas throughout Central Asia. Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, even Azerbaijan, all these stand countries, because a lot of them surround the Caspian Sea. At the Caspian Sea are the greatest resources of oil and natural gas and uranium in the world. We can't allow these resources to be taken by Russia. We can't allow them to be taken by China. We want them. Not the United States, but the money cartel within the United States needs these natural resources.
Right.
So what they did was they used Gülen to set up to begin something called a pan-Turkish movement, because everybody in the stand countries, you know, were once part of the Ottoman Empire. Mm-hmm. They speak Turkish. They have a Turkish background, a Turkish culture. They're all Islamic. So you see, Gülen, with his message, could unite all these people, at least according to the CIA, and that's why we back them.
Right, right. So now you mentioned Gladio earlier. Let's talk about Gladio, because obviously there's the historical aspect of Gladio, which we know has to do with stay-behind armies, basically the fascist elements, in the post-World War era, the former Nazis and basically fascist groups that were being utilized by the Western intelligence apparatus of NATO, and basically were used not only as stay-behind armies in case of a Soviet invasion, but oftentimes were engaging in terror attacks in the West to then blame on various leftists, whether it's Red Brigade or socialist parties, right, to basically try to create political shifts internally in the West.
Yes. Matter of fact, as you know, like during Gladio I, the years of lead in Italy, when there were these horrific bombings, even the Bologna bombing, Positive Fontana, they were all done by the stay-behind units, the Gladio units, spurred on by the CIA, funded by the CIA, and all these attacks were blamed on the communists. And of course, the communists were completely, innocent. So it was a ploy. But not only in Italy, but in Germany, the Hamburg bombing, throughout Latin America. I mean, the dictatorships, the dirty war in Argentina. This was all part of Gladio, and the figures that played in Gladio at that time are incredibly interesting because one, of course, is Jose Maria Bergoglio, who was Pope Francis.
The current Pope, because he was, well, precisely, no one really can account for what he did during the dirty war in Argentina, which was brutal. Obviously, he saw the execution of so many people who were considered leftists, right, socialists of all ages, right?
The priest who would support the liberation theology. I mean, you got to realize he turned over two of his priests, not only the members of their congregation, but the priests themselves, turned them over to the junta, where they were tortured for months and months and months, where members of their congregation were loaded on transport helicopters, flown over the ocean and dumped off. This was all part of Pope Francis, and it was all part of Gladio I,
right?
Which of course never ended.
When Francis was a cardinal, basically, he was just a regular bishop at that time?
No, he was the provincial general of the Society of Jesus. He was a Jesuit.
I see, just one of the generals. But so this obviously, Gladio does harken back to Italy. A lot of the apparatus of the let's say the not only financial apparatus, which you cover in your book about the money laundering that went through the Catholic Church,
right.
the Vatican Bank historically, but also the ties to the mafia, who were obviously connected to the drug world, and then that tied them to our own intelligence, particularly CIA, that
yes.
was engaging in the traffic, whether it was heroin and opium from the Golden Triangle during the Vietnam War years, or during the Afghan War in the 80s, obviously seeing a lot of the opium profits, opium being laundered from Afghanistan through Turkey, and the profits being laundered through the Vatican Bank. So where do we ultimately stand as far as understanding the relationship of Gladio past to present? Gladio
never stopped. It never stopped. Most recently, it concerns the operations of Gladio II are focused in Central Asia, focused in not only Turkey, but Syria, Iran. I mean, that's where the focus is. And for a while, it was Libya, but it's still going on. That has never stopped.
But what are the indications that we can be sure that it's continuing?
Okay, let's begin with just one, going back to 1998. We had the bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. We know that right now all the documents have come out that the person that the press and the CIA said was guilty of perpetuating or commandeering these acts was a guy by the name of Muhammad Ali, like the fighter, Muhammad Ali, right? Mm-hmm. He was from California. He allegedly turned radical and he joined Al-Qaeda, and then he bombed the embassies. Well, what really happened is this guy was not taking part in the activities in Afghanistan or Pakistan at all. He was on U.S. military bases being trained once again by Army intelligence. When he was finally captured, really by mistake, he was brought on trial, and guess what happened? He disappeared. Mm-hmm. Disappeared, go poof, into thin air.
Right.
Then you have, of course, the mysteries surrounding 9/11. You got false flag attack, which is a characteristic of Gladio. Look at Saddam Hussein, look at Gaddafi, look right now about Assad. Every day it goes on. Assad right now, he's creating new weapons of mass destruction. He's creating chemical weapons, so we have to bomb him again. Mm-hmm. This is all Gladio. You see, it are false flags that have no basis in reality at all, and yet the American people buy it time and time and time again.
Right. So you talked earlier about the Caspian Sea region. Obviously, Brzezinski, before he passed away in the 90s, wrote about the grand chessboard concept and the importance of Central Asia and controlling Central Asia because it's the underbelly of Eurasia, the Russians and the Chinese to the east, Europe to the west. But there's this tremendous bank of oil, basically oil and natural gas that seems to exist, particularly in the Caspian region. So would you say that the conflicts that we're seeing from the U.S. in Afghanistan to obviously the desire to depose Assad in Syria has to do with natural gas pipelines at the end of the day?
Absolutely, Sean. You got to realize that even the Afghan war, the Soviet Afghan war, you see, the Soviets in the 1970s, they didn't know that oil and natural gas were lodged with such great wealth right around the Caspian Sea. And of course, Russia borders the Caspian Sea. So when they made that discovery in 1970, and the Caspian Sea is landlocked. It's not, connected to any ocean. So you have the problem of getting the oil and the natural gas out of the Caspian Sea to a harbor, to a port where it can be transported. Well, the Russians needed, going back in 1979, where they realized that they had found these great reserves of, and of course these like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan were all part of the Soviet Union at that time. So they could, but the problem of creating the pipeline was going through Afghanistan, where they met resistance. And that's why that really accounts for the 1979 invasion. That's the economic reason. But once again, going back to the 1990s, you had people like Unocal Oil Company, which was affiliated with Standard Oil, all the big oil giants in the United States. And when they brought the Taliban, they brought our money people and our bankers, brought the Taliban to power, provided them with the arms, provided them with the military expertise and the training, okay? And once the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 1996, they were transported, all the members of the Taliban, including Mullah Omar, were transported to Texas to meet with the officials from Unocal about creating this pipeline. We want at this time, Unocal wanted the Taliban to protect the pipeline,
right,
and to keep the other warlords away from it, so that it could flow once again from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan into Pakistan to right around Kabul, where there's a port.
But that deal fell apart.
That deal, exactly. But that deal, no, Sean, it never really fell apart. They backed up because the Taliban was getting wined and dined by the Chinese and by the Russians and by everybody else, and their heads started to spin. So the Taliban was indecisive. That's why the embassies had to be bombed, and the Al-Qaeda had to be made synonymous with the Taliban. So
they're basically setting up with this war. But have we seen the expansion or the proposal to actually build these pipelines since the U.S. has been in Afghanistan since 2002 now? Have we actually seen any development on that front?
Yes, it's going on right now as we're speaking. I mean, as we're speaking. I mean, unfortunately, most people in news that I speak to, and I was in news all my life, are very dumb. And, even if you talk to them about the Caspian Sea, they couldn't find it on a map. And once you say, oh, a pipeline is being created right now by Amoco and these oil companies through Afghanistan, so what? They don't realize the real significance of that. And they don't realize the significance even when it comes to Iran. Iran's right on the basin of the Caspian Sea. So it becomes strategically important for the money cartel, for the CIA, for U.S. interest, for the U.S. economy, to control all this wealth from the Caspian Sea. So you got Iran, right next to Iran, you have northern Iraq. Well, we took out northern Iraq, and
well, now northern Iraq is being occupied by ISIS, and it seems that every time there's a major push by Assad's regime or the Iraqi regime to actually depose the ISIS base, we get then an allegation that immediately pops up of chemical weapons being used, and then U.S. forces start to shift, again against the Assad regime, right?
I could scream because, number one, I very rarely talk to anybody who's insightful, but this is what happened, and you know it, and you know what's happening right now with that whole situation. It's we created ISIS. I mean, ISIS is no less than the people up in Islamburg, no less than Gülen, is a CIA creation. John McCain, for heaven's sake, was over there with the ISIS officials. We created them. They came from the Al-Nusra group, the Syrian Liberation Front. These two organizations combined, and they morphed into ISIS. It's our creation. We create them. We still direct them. When ISIS warriors are injured in battle, where are they transported? They're transported, for heaven's sake, to Israel. They're treated by the Israelis in Israeli hospitals and brought back to battle.
Well, plenty of the rebels have acknowledged that they've been supported by Israel, and they've thanked Israel for helping them throughout. In fact, arms are oftentimes caught. Israeli arms are caught on en route to the rebel groups. But when it comes to this, then the grand scheme, the grand chessboard game, obviously we're seeing the neocon strategy. Wes Clark talked about it: destabilize and overthrow the governments of Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, Libya, Syria, Iran. I mean, this was the strategy that he talked about over 15 years ago.
Yes.
And obviously we've seen it come to fruition to a large extent. But what is the game is ultimately, is it just continuing to destabilize the sovereign regimes that oppose the will of the various financial oil conglomerates, or is it to create just total chaos in this entire region?
Well, the ultimate goal, of course, is money, wealth. You know, real wealth comes from natural resources. Our money is, just fabricated. It's not backed by anything. Mm-hmm. But real wealth comes from natural resources, be it gold, be it oil, be it heroin, which is the third most valuable commodity in the world right now. Another reason we're in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. But the end of the game is being played to be won. It's not a game that will go on ad infinitum. Mm-hmm. It's being played to win, so that at the end of the day, the money cartel from the United States primarily, it's really an Anglo-American establishment.
British and U.S.
Yes, but at the end of the day, they control the natural resources. Russia's dependent on it. So Russia, of course, if you're depriving it of natural resources, you're depleting all of its power. Mm-hmm. The same thing with China. So the end of the game is total economic control of the world.
Mm-hmm. And then what do we make then of these terror attacks that occur in the West, let's say in London or in Brussels and Paris? Obviously, it reeks of Gladio in the sense of students of Gladio obviously would say, wait a minute, and you have this kind of mass shootings and bombings and various staged events. They were, during Gladio period, we know they were blamed on the leftist groups, but actually it was the fascists that were conducting it. You're talking about various of the jihadists who are being run by CIA operatives and may themselves be full-blown CIA operatives. What is the agenda then that you see taking place with these attacks in the West?
Okay, once again, Sean, you got to realize that I come at this differently than most people because I did my homework. Mm-hmm. I'm an old Irishman. I like to fight. Mm-hmm. So I went to Brooklyn, for instance, to the Farouk Mosque. I went there. I didn't just go there. I went in the mosque. Mm-hmm. Got on the elevator, went in the mosque. I talked to people there. They wanted to throw me out and everything else. But I found out this, that the Farouk Mosque, which is called the most radical mosque now in the country, you got to realize like the assassination of Rabbi Kahane originated there. You got to realize that the attacks of 1993 on the World Trade Center originated there. Mm-hmm. You got to realize that these people have been accused of raising $24 to $28 million a year for Al-Qaeda. Wow. Right there. Okay, this is what I discovered from the Farouk Mosque. And I hope that the CIA is listening, because if I'm lying, you should grab me by the neck and throw me in the slammer. This is the most radical mosque in the country. If a terror attack comes, it's going to come from either Islamburg or a place like this, right? Mm-hmm. They have been receiving, since the time of the Reagan administration, a mosque right here in New York, millions of dollars a year. And the place is used as an arsenal. During every Saturday and every Sunday, they remove weapons from the Farouk Mosque, and they go to the firing range and they practice.
And again, it's basically the stay-behind army in a sense, in case of
our own stay, not stay behind, stay here army.
Right, but I'm saying, but it would be in case they want to create some sort of terror event, some sort of domestic unrest, a martial law scenario.
Oh, absolutely.
You name it, you need these type of secret armies. We've seen the secret armies in the U.S. going back to the Cubans. When we had the Cuban secret armies, we deployed around the world. People forget. You had, obviously, again, the Gladio armies in Europe. All these things are secret armies, and so why not have secret armies within the Islamic world?
Our own, and we can train them in places like Islamburg and everything else. And guess what? Do you know how easy it would be in a city like this to really have an attack that would be horrific beyond measure? A radiological event? All you need to do is get some cesium, which is common. You can get it from a food processing plant, from a hospital. Just cesium. 1 grain of that is a bone sucker. If 1 grain got on this building, they couldn't rip it down. They couldn't wash it off. They'd have to take this place to a dedicated landfill for it because it's so dangerous. All you need to do is wrap some cesium. Forget about an explosion around a firecracker.
Right.
Set it off on that street. What would happen?
Yeah.
Goodbye, New York.
But based on your research of Gladio, I mean, it was essentially the attacks were always designed to shift political allegiance. I mean, what was the idea? It was ultimately financial and political.
Absolutely. And you know, if that happened in New York, they have the perks already here. You know what would happen. Martial law would be the least of it.
Yeah. Well, it's a horrible endgame scenario. We have to hope it doesn't get to that level. But obviously, we've seen the greed of the financial sector, of the military-industrial complex, of the desire, as you say, to dominate and control the resources of the planet. So we don't know where it can end, and obviously, what can happen next, even in this country.
It can only end with global economic control. It has no end except there.
It's very sobering. Paul, I appreciate you coming on today and talking with me and sharing with your information and your research.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.